Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with Oregon-based jazz performer, composer, and educator Rob Scheps. We caught up with him to talk about a variety of topics, namely his latest 2021 CD with the TBA Band called Live at the Churchill School on Powder Rhythm Records. It was during the summer of 2020 that he felt it was an opportune moment to record some music that had been gestating over the long spring. Over his long and storied career, he has recorded 35 albums, and it all began in Long Island, New York, when he began studying the tenor saxophone at the age of 9. He would move on to the prestigious New England Conservatory of Music, and so many adventures in his career. He holds Kansas City in a very high regard. He talks about this and so much more. Get to know him. Dig this interview.
Rob, hey, thank you for taking a minute out for Neon Jazz today, man. I appreciate it.
Oh, no problem, Joe.
Rob, I know that there's so much material that was constructed and put together prior to this pandemic. And when I ask, how you feel about something coming out during a pandemic, I guess it's just a general feeling question about releasing something during a time on the planet that's been so extreme for musicians because there's been no live music and just that whole thing. How does it feel to be able to do that?
My feeling about it is that we would be releasing music anyway. We're not able to perform for the most part, but we are able to record and we are able to release records. So in that way, it has a different emotional impact, but the work itself, in some ways, is business as usual, at least in the studio.
Talk to me about your new live CD. It's been getting some pretty good ink. It's a great sound. And obviously in this time of almost a year now of mainly live music being kind of void from people's lives, that has to feel good to not only get this kind of on a CD or in a digital format for people, but it's live and it's for public consumption.
Sure. Well, the CD is called Live at the Churchill School, Joe, because we did it at a venue by that name in Eastern Oregon in a town called, a small city named Baker City, Oregon. It's just a conducive place to work. It's out of the city. It's about a 4-hour drive from Portland, a little more, and I got the band together out there on Labor Day weekend of 2020, and we banged out basically 2 records of my original compositions, all new pieces, in 3 days.
What do you ultimately want the listener to get from this experience? I know that that's not the first thing that's on
whatever they
an
want
artist.
I mean, that's kind of a general question, and the music on this CD is pretty varied. There's straight ahead jazz, there's funk, there's accordion, there's old timey kind of sounds. It's so varied. My feeling is, you just open your ears and listen to it, and I feel like there's enough variety. There's hopefully something for everybody. You might like this tune and not the other one. Who knows?
What do you miss from that old world that went away last year? What are you looking forward to getting back to?
The same thing as everybody else. Community, being around people, and playing some goddamn live gigs without a fuss. That's what I'm looking forward to.
What do you hope we all realize about this time away from live music, both audience and musician? Silver lining? What do you hope we get? Because we in our recent memory, we had 9/11, and there was this swell of feelings after that where, we're all going to do this. We're going to band together. And then things kind of started drifting apart. I was feeling this is a little bit more magnanimous being global and just this absence for this long. So I guess with that as the backdrop, what do you hope we all get from this?
That's a hard question for me to answer because I'm so angry about it. The only thing that I've gotten from it of any value, and it's the same for a lot of people, is realizing a deeper gratitude for community and for live music. And I have colleagues who think live music is going to come back in a huge way. I'm not confident that's going to happen, but I hope they're right and I'm wrong. And the other thing is, everybody got hit with a sea change, a major change in their lives in every way. And so for musicians, we all had to recalibrate. And for me, that's meant more composing and more recording, and writing, doing whatever you're doing. But we've all been limited, so everybody had to... It's like we all have a new handicap. It's like losing an arm and then learning to function without it, something like that.
The one thing I did want to get into, which is the way I ran into you, is I realized that you have Kansas City ties. I mean, you have wonderful music, and I'm so glad that I ran into you, but the ties to Kansas City is inextricable. Talk to me a little bit about are you in Portland now?
I'm outside of Portland. Yeah, I've traditionally split my time bi-coastally between New York and Portland, Oregon, and that's been going on for many years. But in my heart, I consider Kansas City pretty much my third home, because I spend a little less time there. I'm not rooted there in a full-time way, but for many years I would come every April and October for tour, and then it kind of split open and became a little more sporadic and less predictable what time of year. But the way I began playing in Kansas City, Joe, and being there a lot was I had not been touring in the Midwest. I'd been touring on both coasts for a long time, and I realized there was kind of this probably very large market with a bunch of Midwestern cities that I wasn't part of. I wasn't performing for these people. I wasn't experiencing these towns. And it turns out that two very good friends of mine from childhood that I've been playing with my whole life, drummer Todd Strait and pianist Roger Wilder, were in Kansas City. So I contacted them from Portland. They set up the first gigs, and that, was the gateway to starting to show up twice a year and building a lot of friendships and musical relationships that are really, pretty deep. Roger and Bob Bowman and I have been the nucleus of a band for, seems like 15 or 20 years now, and for a long time I brought in some incredible special guest artists from New York, like clockwork, every 6 months. Shunzo Ono, Roger Rosenberg from Steely Dan, Frank Basile, Greg Gisbert, Jason Jackson. So Kansas City afforded me an opportunity not only to play some great music and to be in a very different part of the country with a different, more relaxed, friendlier mindset than some other places, but to really develop something with Roger and Bob and Brian Stever and Ryan Lee and certain musicians that I got to play with a bunch. And, I found it very satisfying. So I guess, there are other cities where I might show up once every 2 years, play one night and say thank you and move on. But with Kansas City, there's so much more there, in my opinion, that I enjoy being there for longer periods. And as a matter of fact, when the quarantine started in March of last year, Kansas City is exactly where I was. We were recording in the studio with Brad Gregory and Roger and Bobby Watson and a host of other folks. And we did about 4 days of recording, and that was right around St. Patrick's Day. And I was supposed to drive to Indianapolis and then New York City and play both of those places in the following week. And I ended up quarantined in Kansas City for 3.5 months. And we were all traumatized and in shock, and we didn't know what to do initially except, stay home and be safe. But my experience was that since I already loved Kansas City and I have a lot of connection and friends and musical colleagues there, and I love the area anyway, I told myself, well, if you're going to be stuck somewhere for 3 or 4 months, this is a great place to be stuck.
So talk to me about how everything started out for you. Where were you born and raised? Kind of how did music and jazz become your profession?
My family's from New York City originally. I'm the only native Oregonian in my family. I was born in Oregon. I grew up a little bit in Columbus, Ohio, but mostly on Long Island, New York, about 2 hours outside of New York City. And when you're close to New York City, you are close to one of the fulcrums of jazz. The greatest players, the greatest teachers, clubs like the Village Vanguard and Sweet Basil. And so basically I just started playing tenor sax in fifth grade band, like a lot of American kids. And I was pretty serious about it from the start. And I got into jazz. I started hearing things when I was about 11, and I kind of committed myself to it pretty soon after that. And, beyond that, I'll answer whatever question you have, but I'm not sure what you'd like to know.
Well, I guess, talk to me a little bit about the first show. I mean, if you were that close to the epicenter of it all, what was the first jazz show that you thought, man, this is what I want to do with my life?
I can't tell you the first one, but I do recall a few that I heard when I was a teenager, when I was still in high school. I heard George Coleman's quartet play a free concert in New York City. I heard Bill Evans at the Village Vanguard when I was, I think, 13 years old. Not long before he passed away. And that was pretty seminal. That was his last trio with Mark Johnson and Joe LaBarbera. It was incredible. And growing up on Long Island, they had a lot of free summer concerts in the parks, and they were pretty serious musicians. I got to see Lionel Hampton, Buddy Rich, Woody Herman, all with their bands and all still in their primes. And those concerts, I think when you're a kid and you're not allowed into clubs, seeing live concerts outside that's one way that you can engage in the music. So that's some of what I heard early on that had an effect on me. But what had the biggest effect, I mean, this is a cliche for so many saxophone players, but when I heard John Coltrane play the piece Africa with a big band from the Africa Brass Sessions, that's when the dime drops. That's what did it for me.
You know, it's funny, you're like the third person in like a week that I've talked to that have literally said that John Coltrane was the turning point. And I'm always amazed. Like, between him and Miles and some of these seminal people, like, the amount of good that they did, the amount of careers they hatched is mind-blowing.
Yeah, I guess so. And the thing is, I've had a lot of saxophone influences since then. I mean, I'm kind of a historian, and you probably know I have this interview series for Live Jazz KC called Convo and Bravo, and we've done about 50 interviews since the pandemic started, roughly one a week. And but I have to say, even with my other influences since then, Sonny Rollins, Joe Henderson, John Gilmore, Billy Harper, Wayne Shorter, these folks are all really important to me. But at the root of it, Coltrane remains probably still the biggest influence in a lot of ways that are a little more wide-ranging than just playing the tenor and soprano saxophones.
So let's get a little fantastical here. Let's say a jazz DeLorean pulls up in front of your house, and you can punch in the digits, go anywhere you want. Who are you going to see? And more importantly, and this is anyone in the world, the realm of jazz, who would you want to talk to after the show?
Well, I haven't thought about it a lot, but off the top of my head, I'd like to hear Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie on 52nd Street, hopefully with Monk, Max Roach, Kenny Clark, some of those folks. I would want to hear the John Coltrane Quartet at Birdland or at the Vanguard, the classic quartet with McCoy, Elvin, and Jimmy Garrison. I would like to hear the famous Miles Davis quintets, the first one in the 50s with Red Garland and Train, and then the one with Wayne Shorter and Herbie in the late 60s. I'd like to hear the Gil Evans Band when they had a residency at the Jazz Gallery downtown Manhattan. These are some of the things, but I'd also like to be in New Jersey a lot, and that sounds like a strange thing to say, but a lot of the classic Prestiges and Blue Notes were recorded in New Jersey. In fact, if you look at all of your favorite Blue Note records, they were recorded at Rudy Van Gelder's studio, initially in Hackensack, and then later in Englewood Cliffs. So records that really matter to you, like Blue Train by John Coltrane, you have to school yourself, wait a minute, man, this music was made in New Jersey. So I kind of like to be a fly on the wall at Rudy's during a lot of those incredible Art Blakey and Coltrane and Wayne Shorter sessions. You've
been around a lot of heavy hitters in your life, on stage and in the studio. What have you learned from the legends, luminaries, big shots that in turn you have taught younger players that get around you?
I learned from trombonist Julian Priester, who's a good buddy of mine and is still cooking at 85 in Seattle. I learned from him never to accept a hotel room next to the elevator or the ice machine. Oh, sounds funny. We're having breakfast in Calgary, Alberta in Canada before a gig, and I specifically asked him, what's some stuff that you've learned in your older age and longer career? You're older than me. What have you learned that you would want to teach me? And that's what he came up with. That's a little more mundane. That's more about road chops and traveling comfortably. Can you be a little more specific? Maybe I can find something.
I don't know. I mean, there's things that, I've heard things range from the fact that they're consummate, show people they take it seriously. When you see that acumen, it really gets into your blood. Just things that you see, that just have influenced the way that you've decided to carry on your career, the way that you played your music, the way that you've done what you do that would be resonant enough, wise enough to pass on to a younger generation?
Off the top of my head, a lot of the jazz musicians I know really got to a point in their career where they could play only jazz and be at least moderately successful. My good buddy John Abercrombie was an example of that. I mean, he wasn't doing weddings, he wasn't doing Broadway, he was either playing jazz or he was at home for probably the last 30, 40 years of his life. But in the 70s, he did do commercial work in the studios, record dates. You know, that was kind of a model for me that it is possible, not for everybody, but if you're Dave Holland or Herbie Hancock or Wayne Shorter or Joe Lovano, you can craft a career that's all around creative music. So, of course, financially, this is very difficult to do, but I have equal respect for the guys that I know who are tremendous players with day jobs. I mean, Rich Cooper was the best lead trumpet player in Portland, Oregon. He tuned pianos during the day. You know, Buck Hill, the tenor player in Washington, D.C., legendary player, was a postman for many years. And my friend Sheila Jordan, with whom I get to perform with Cameron Brown and Tony Jefferson a couple of times a year maybe. Sheila's 92 and she's still performing. She kept her job in New York City basically as a successful secretary for 30 or 40 years. So even after she was a known jazz person, a known quantity in music, and famous, she held on to her day job, and she ended up being able to buy a nice house because of it. I have other friends who play Broadway all the time, and they remain great jazz musicians. Some examples of that were Mike Migliori and Glenn Drews and Roger Rosenberg, Tony Cadleck, and then there are other people who just play Broadway. They're more just working musicians. But so you can play Broadway and you can play jazz. You can play weddings and you can play jazz. You can have a day job and you can play jazz, or you can just play jazz. And they're all viable, and I'm a lot more flexible about it now than I was when I was a kid, where I had this perhaps unrealistic notion that, well, screw it, man, I play jazz, that's what I'm going to do. Well, we're not in Italy, we're not in Japan, and it's too hard to make a living doing only that most of the time in America. So flexibility is key. So for me, I write about jazz for magazines, and I get paid for that. I teach in person and online. I do clinics. I get commissions to either compose or arrange pieces for people. So, okay, now I found something to answer your question in my very long-winded answer. Versatility is the key. That's what I would tell a young musician. That's the first thing I would tell them. I mean, well, maybe the first thing I would tell them is the music business sucks. It's never been worse. And I hate to tell you, but I was telling students that before the pandemic. Now, I don't even need to tell them that. It's clear to everyone in the world. But my point is, if you are a saxophonist and you play good flute, that might be an extra gig. If you can copy parts or you play good bass clarinet, that could be another gig. If you can play Latin music, if you can play soul and funk, if you can read well, if you can play in a symphony orchestra, all of that stuff, I would say, regardless of the professional climate where and when you live, if you hone multiple skills, you stand a better chance of making a comfortable living and enjoying your life and your career. How's that?
It's a very simple question, but why do you love jazz?
It's a very broad question, Joe. But if I'm thinking of the first people who pop into my head when I hear the words love jazz, and I think of Gary Bartz and Wayne Shorter and John Coltrane and Gil Evans and Russell Roland Kirk and Duke Ellington, you know, Betty Carter, whoever pops to mind, I guess it's tough to verbalize, but I would say the freedom to be an individual and the freedom in a sometimes oppressive society to fully express yourself in an honest way that is uncensored.
Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, your students, that you're the one in control of your life. Who do you think you are?
I'm the one in control of my life. That's news to me. To me, that's just too general a question. I'm not even sure I want to answer it. I mean, the only thing I would say would be something very, very general, which is I'm a very good musician who's committed to jazz and the saxophone and composition, who believes that music can improve the world in a deep way and that the arts are not optional, that they're necessary in the schools and they're necessary in real life. I try to be a good person, and I can get grumpy, but I try to be honest and loving and care for other people and share with them and help them whenever I see an opportunity. That's all I can tell you about that.
I think the problem with this question is that it gets overthought, and that's the answer that ultimately is what I'm going for.
Can I say one more thing about that tribal youth torch passing stuff?
Yeah.
Okay, and again, you can edit out all this like fuss between questions, right?
Yeah.
Well, so Joe, you've mentioned a couple of times the notion of musicians either, passing the torch or mentoring or helping younger musicians with, what we deem to be valuable information. And I do think that's really important. I mean, I've been teaching music to other people since I was 13 years old, and I used to think of it as just a supplement to performing, just a way to make money. And as I got deeper into it, I see that there's a really deep value in teaching music. And I guess what I would say is I view jazz musicians as it's like a gigantic tribal situation. It would be the equivalent of a culture 1,000 years ago, ancient Navajo or Shoshone Indians, or ancient Egypt or ancient Mali, somewhere without computers, just somewhere where the older cats teach the younger cats what they know. I spent 3 months living in Taos, New Mexico for an artist residency, and I learned about some of the local Native American culture. And one thing that they do with the Taos Indians is they have a thing called the kiva, which is essentially an underground private learning center where when the kids become a certain age, they're taken down there and kind of taught the secrets of the tribe. And so it's kind of a really cool concept, and I envision with jazz that it's kind of like a giant kiva. And if I think, who are the people who mentored me and really helped me and taught me, I would say Jimmy Jufrey and Joe Allard, George Russell, Fred Hirsch and Bob Moses a little bit. And that was all at New England Conservatory, all of those amazing people. But also Frank Porowski, a tenor player in New York, Justin DiCiocio and Clem DeRosa and Don Palmer, great music educators. And people like Julian Priester, people who are your idols when you're a kid, and then you grow up, you get to play with them, and you get to say things to them like, tell me about John Coltrane, tell me about that record day with Miles, tell me what it was like playing with Max Roach. So let's put it this way. I've been well mentored, and I have a lot of appreciation for it, and I feel that it's really our duty as musicians to pass on our knowledge to younger cats and to try to encourage them and save them a little bit of pain and heartache and wrong turns. If you see somebody playing with their cheeks puffed out, you tell them early, hey man, you're playing the horn wrong, let's fix that. So mentorship in jazz, and the best example would be Art Blakey with the Jazz Messengers, or Miles Davis with all of his bands. It's vital, and it's part of the fabric of what we do. And when you look at it, there's no Dizzy Gillespie without Roy Eldridge. There's no, there's no Sun Ra without Fletcher Henderson. There's no John Coltrane without Sonny Stitt and Dexter Gordon. So the influences are really important, and then the personal interactions and mentorships are maybe even more important. That's what I had to say about that.
Yeah, that's great, man. Great. Thank you for adding that. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Sure.
Rob, thank you, man. Thanks for taking some time out. I really appreciate it. I look forward to catching you live at some point when you're back in Kansas City. That'd be wonderful.
Absolutely, and believe me, I'll get there as soon as I can. And Joe, when I come to town, let's have lunch and let's meet in person. Yeah, you bet. And you know what? I guess I want to leave this interview in kind of a triumphant way, and a little bit of this is because we are a Kansas City-based radio show. But I want to ask you my final question, and it's this: okay. What do you like the best about Kansas City? I love everything about Kansas City, except there sure are a lot of churches. What I love about Kansas City, the cliche, okay, you get on an airplane and you're reading some boring airline magazine, and it says, "Come to Kansas City." And what's the cliche? The cliche is blues, jazz, barbecue, and fountains. That's how we market Kansas City, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, the jazz scene is incredible. Blues and rock scene, whatever else is going on, I've only seen a taste of it. But I think the music scene and the quality of the symphony, the quality of the ballet orchestra, the opera, music is on a very high level in the Kansas City area, and it's got great musicians, and I think there's a bit more appreciation in the city than there is in most other places in America. That's my experience. It's still one of the great music towns. Don't let New York and L.A. fool you. Kansas City's right up there. I am a deep fan of Kansas City barbecue. I currently think the best barbecue you can get, and I don't really care, what anybody thinks, because, of course, we all have strong opinions about this. Formerly Oklahoma Joe's Kansas City barbecue. I feel that in some ways that's really the best. Arthur Bryant's is pretty low down and great. And there's a lot of other good stuff, 239, Stroud's for fried chicken. I'm sure I'm forgetting a whole bunch of places. But so the barbecue thing, just by itself, the soul and the love that go into the music in Kansas City, that's the same kind of energy that goes into the food. I want to give a shout out to Ashley's Pie Shop or Bake Shop in the basement of Prize in Westport. Ashley is the wife of drummer Jim Lauer, and she makes the best pies I've ever had in the United States. So, to be really blunt with you, I go to Kansas City to play music, make a living, see my friends, and eat. all of those things are actually on the same high plane. And I have wonderful friendships in Kansas City, partially because some of the folks there are people I used to know in New York and Boston who've ended up there, but and a lot of them are also Kansas City natives who've never left. So I feel like the city has heart and soul. I feel like it's better integrated than a lot of major American cities. And I just get a good feeling when I'm there. There's a lot of history. Joe Klopas, my friend who writes for the Kansas City Star, one day he took me on a Charlie Parker tour, and we spent the entire day driving around Kansas City looking at schools and homes where Charlie Parker lived. And so that's the thing to me. I mean, the word soul is kind of overused, but Kansas City has much soul, as much as anywhere I've ever been, and that includes internationally. So I just have a deep, abiding love for the city. And even if I'm there and I have a couple days to myself and all I have to do is drive around, I'll end up at the Nelson Atkins or the Kemper to look at art. I know where to get barbecue on my own. I might go to Brobeck's and, get a ham salad sandwich. There's so many things I love about Kansas City that what I just said is my lame attempt to try to articulate how much I love Kansas City.
No, you did it. You totally nailed it. Rob, thank you again. I appreciate you taking time out.
Thank you too, Joe. Stay in touch. Pleasure to do the interview. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Long Island, Oregon, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Rob for his time, music, and class. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.